Hi, how's it going? I'm sorry I stopped the song, or I'm sorry I made you listen to it. Either way, how's it going? I'm finally here doing another stream after like 2 years or something. I think last I did was the particle editor. Yeah, so pretty excited. Everyone who's here, please say hi in the chat. I wanna see you all. I wanna see who all is here, and just let me know if you see me fine and you hear me fine. Just wanna make sure everything's okay before we get into it. Let's see Unity drop a sick guitar solo. I hope my next song has a solo, because this one didn't. But yeah, hi, a lot of people. Oh man, 65 just to start with. That is a good number. I don't think we had that much last time. Nice. A lot of new people. Nice, welcome. Uh, Someone says I love your guitar. Thank you so much. I am good. How are you guys doing? I because I'm seeing so many new faces. I wanna know like how long have you guys been using GameMaker? I think that'll be a good thing for me to get like a read of that. Like, are you guys new? Has it been like a few months only? Are you guys veterans? Like, what is it for you guys? Do let me know in the chat. I'm quite curious to know that. And we'll get started soon. We have 62 people already, which is quite a lot. So we'll get started in like 2 hours. Yeah, I know. 2 months, nice. 2021. GameMaker has never used it. Okay, that's a shame. I'll teach you. It's fine. Right. Years, but only recently got serious. Yeah, that was me for like the first 4 years that I started using GameMaker, and it's like I wasn't serious at all. Since 2023, 5, 6 months, 15 years. Right. We have a mix of a lot of people, a lot of beginners and a lot of uh, veterans, like 5 years. But I know like everyone's looking forward to UI layers. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or you've been using GameMaker for like 40 years. You Everyone's looking forward to UI layers, and yeah, I can't wait to show it because it's a lot. It's a lot, and yeah, I was confused about like, okay, how do I go about showing it? Because there's so much and so many ways that you can go doing the same stuff. So let's see how that goes. What's the best game engine? Like, you're gonna come into GameMaker's chat and you're gonna ask what's the best game engine. Don't you think that's a bit biased? But I hope you get the answer that you're looking for. Everyone's waited 10 years for UI layers. Me too, bro. Me too. I am Brazil. I am India. Right. Oh, damn, we have 71 people. Let's get into it anyway. I'm gonna switch to my GameMaker screen, and I hope you can see it now. It's like that awkward moment at the start of a company meeting call when you're trying to share your screen, and like, do you see it? But you should still be able to see me and hear me fine. And I've got a project here that I was working on like just yesterday, just like preparing for this stream. And this is basically what we're gonna be uh, just going through, what we're gonna be making today. Um, Come to Brazil. I think I will. Um, so let me run this. Black bar at the bottom. Yes, I'm hiding my precious icons. Don't want to get them stolen. What you're seeing right now is four separate viewports, and every viewport is displaying hearts. That's because you can have a UI that only appears on viewports. Like, if you know viewports, you use that if you have a split screen game and you have multiple views on the screen. And then you can have UI that's just on the GUI layer, which is like not viewports, just on the game. So this is an example of that, and you have both types of UI layers working, so on the viewport and on that. And like we're gonna go through how this kind of thing is laid out, because like a big part of this is just layout. Like that's the main thing here. It helps you lay out your objects and sprites and all that, and it makes them responsive. Because when you think about what do you need in a UI layer, like you can have buttons and stuff which you can program easily with objects. Like you can already do that, but there's no easy way to lay them out nicely in a list. So it helps you with that. It keeps it responsive. So like if you take the same game and you put it on mobile, it should like it shouldn't like distort, right? It should be responsive, and it should like move and scale properly. So it helps you with that. But yeah, we're gonna go through how to make like switch into a different menu. We are up to 97 viewers. I hope we can hit 100. I That would be really nice. Yeah, we're gonna go through that. Let me see if the responsiveness of this was working. Right, so you can see how this is responsive, and like it's responding to the change in the window size. And we're gonna go through how all of that works. And even this you can see. So and what you're seeing here, like these are objects. These buttons, they are objects. The text you can add in UI layers. Like you don't have to do draw text. You can um, do that. I'll go tell my 3 friends. Please do. I also shared this in the weird 4-person group chat before this. So share with your friends. Um, yeah. So we're gonna go through all this. Like this is one of the examples that we're gonna go through today. I've got multiple examples that I wanna go through, but let me go into a new project so we can do this from the start, right? So what is new is you go into a room, and I'm trying to do this and also make sure I stay up to date with the chat at the same time. So it's a question about space rocks, but I'm not gonna jump onto that here. Just gonna keep it on topic for UI layers. So if you go in the room, you'll see. I hope all of this is readable in the UI. Thank you, Roman. Uh, there's a button for making a new layer, so you don't have separate buttons now. It's just have a plus button, and you have a UI layer, and you click on that. It makes a UI folder on the left. No, I don't watch cricket. Um, so you make a UI folder. When you make a UI layer, it makes a UI folder for you if you don't already have that. And this little menu appears on the side that shows you your UI layer. And this UI folder is global. So if I go and make another room, the UI folder is still there. It's a different room, but the same UI layers are gonna be here. Like if I go to the first room and I add another UI layer, it's in the other room as well. So you do edit it in the room editor, but it's not it's not specific to any room. You you just design them in the room editor, but when you run your game right now, the layers are just created with the first room, and all the layers are initialized with the first room. Um, that whole behavior is still being worked on, so that's not entirely final. Um, but these are just global, they're not tied to any room right now. But yeah, in general, I do want to say, like, I motivate you guys to go and check this out and use it. This is like really early right now. Like the first version of this in the beta, it came out last week, so this is really new. And you guys go use it, and if you find any issues, report the bugs. And this is like a great time to take feedback from you guys as well, in the way of in the form of bug reports and feature requests, because this just came out publicly, right? And so far it's just been like us internally using this. So we want to see like how you guys use it. Like everyone has a different way of using GameMaker. So yeah, like after this, make sure you go download it and just use it. And whatever feedback you have, like let us know. Um, because yeah, like I say, this is really early. So right, it's global. Let's get into how you actually put stuff in a UI layer. Now, this is gonna be the thing that is like uh, the main thing that UI layers revolve around, and this is the thing that is really important to understand and grasp if you want to be able to use UI layers, and it's flex panels. Some of you, if you've been paying attention to the betas, you might know last year we put out an update where we added flex panel functions to the runtime, and it helped you like lay out how like your interfaces should be like laid out on the screen. So this is an editor for that, and this again still revolves um, around flex panels. Someone's just asked if there's any documentation for this, and there is. So I'm just gonna drop the link for that in the chat, like for your reference, if you wanna just keep it open and like go through it and read it later. So flex panels, right? That's what it operates around. So as for what you can add in a UI layer, you can add sprites, objects, text, and sequences. And obviously, the most important things for you are gonna be sprites, objects, and text. So if I just take a sprite from here, and if I drop it inside the UI layer, in the element list, you can see it's been dropped inside a flex panel. And that's just the name of, like you can change the name, so it doesn't have to be flex panel. Like it can be anything. So you'll be naming your flex panels, but these are flex panels. It's dropped inside a flex panel, and the way that I've been working with this is that everything should be inside a flex panel. As in, if you have one object, you put it inside one flex panel, and if you have like text, you put it inside a flex panel, and it's those flex panels that you're working with to lay out everything. So if I just drop a bunch of sprites here, but you can add them without a flex panel. Like you can obviously pull them out of a flex panel if you want to play around with it. But if you hold control and you add an asset, then it won't be added inside a flex panel. And the UI layer, the root UI layer itself is also a flex panel. So it's like any properties that I apply to the UI layer, you can also apply it to any other flex panel or any other flex panel inside it. So right now you can see it's been added, those three sprites, and we're gonna get into how the layouts work and why this is appearing in this way. But if you want to use it in the most basic way, you can like drag these anywhere. You can resize them. You can see something weird is happening where they are moving in relation to each other, because doing this is not really the best way to work with it, but I'm just showing you that you can do that. Like, right, you can put these things anywhere, but that's not the best way to work with these things, and we're gonna get into all that. But before we get into the layouts, I'm gonna show you how it appears at runtime. So if I run the game, right, it just appears there. But the thing I really like about this, and the thing that it really takes care of, is that it appears on the GUI layer. Like if you ever use the GUI layer, it's just something that appears on your game window, and it's not concerned with your camera or where the camera is in the room. So like if you move your camera, anything you draw to the GUI layer, it, it'll be on the screen. It won't move with the camera. And I'm just gonna add something so we can test that. So I'm gonna add this object here, and for this object I just want it to keep moving. I want to use this sprite as a background, but I'm gonna just scale it up so it's a bit easier to see on the stream. So if I go in the room, and I'm gonna assign this as I mean, it makes sense to, if you want to wait till it's out of beta, because it will be more stable by then. But if you want, you can start using it now, and you'll just get more used to it sooner. And if you find any bugs, that helps GameMaker become more stable faster. So you can do that. I'm gonna increase the size of this room to 4000 by 4000. One thing I want to mention now is I already have the canvas enabled here, but when you start using it, you might not. And by default, the UI layers, they use the whole room as the canvas. Like obviously at runtime, it's going to use the size of the GUI layer or size of the window as the canvas. But while you're making it, by default, it uses the whole room as the canvas. And you can see how those things that I added, they are appearing way in the center of the room. And if you just want them to be in a localized area while you're making your UI, you can enable the canvas from here. And by default, in the beginning, it's gonna be the size of the room, but you can change it here to like 720p or any of the given presets, or you can enter your own size and offset. And you can change the orientation, because like if you want to see how it appears if it's vertical, how it appears if it's horizontal, you can change that. So I've made my room really big, but I've set the canvas here so I can work within this 720p area while I'm like developing my my layers. So what's going on in the chat? Nice. Right. So I've added that object and I've made it move, and I just want to test it with a camera. So I'm gonna make the camera, and I'm gonna ask it to follow this object, and I think everything should work correctly with this. Right, so you can see the camera is moving in the back, but the things that we added in the UI layer are sticking there. So that was the main thing I wanted to show first. So anything you add there, and like I showed in the beginning, you can set your UI layer to viewport as well, and it'll instead stick to the viewport, and then that sort of changes like in the order at runtime where exactly that's drawn. But setting it to viewport is not going to be useful if you just have one viewport, and like most people aren't out there making split screen games, so you just keep it at display and it just draws on the GUI layer. Are all layers now persistent? No, not all layers. Normally, normal layers are still just room layers within a room. It's just UI layers are persistent because you just want to design your UI once and just keep using it. And like we'll get into that, but uh, we'll get into how at runtime you can enable and disable UI layers. So you can just like enable and disable when you want it. But yeah, with that link in the chat just now, you can go and download this and like use the same version that I'm using. This is public. Like this is not something very internal that I'm showing you. This is a public version, so you can download it and try it after the stream. So I have shown you that it's drawn on the GUI layer. Now let's talk about layouts. So I'm gonna drop a sprite in the UI layer. So you can either drop it in the canvas inside the layers area, or you can drop it in the element list. And like I said, like by default, if you're not holding control, it's gonna be added inside a flex panel. And I like that because like I said, I like having each asset inside a flex panel and then working with that flex panel. I can select this sprite, so you can't resize the flex panel here because flex panels have their own options of how they are sized. There's a lot with flex panels that we'll get to. That's one of the things where the size can either be automatic, like you can see here, that's the default. If you drop in an asset, that's the default for its flex panel. It's automatic. It means that its size is based on what's inside it. So I can select the sprite and resize it, and the flex panel gets resized because the flex panel size is set to auto, but it can be a percentage of its parent container, or it can be pixels, and we'll get into that. But right now it's auto, and it's taking the size of whatever is inside the flex panel. You can rewatch this, yeah. We will keep it up on YouTube, and we have hit 104 viewers. Yay! So we have hit the 100 milestone. This combined with 9 slice is going to speed up. I should have mentioned that. Yes, so the sprite that I'm using here is using 9 slice, and that's why when I resize it here in the room, it looks nice and it's maintaining its corners. So it's appearing in the center by default, and you're resizing it and it's getting resized just like from the center as an anchor point. So that happens because because this is in the center and you're resizing it and it's being resized from the center, this is not because of the asset, it's because of the flex panel. And the reason why it's all in the center is because of the parent flex panel, the flex panel that it's inside. You can duplicate layers. Like if I hit Control D, I can duplicate not layers, panels. And you can see we have 3 panels now. In the element list, you can see we have 3 panels that each has a sprite. And again, it's all in the center. Does this support animation? As in, whether you're able to move a panel from one place to the other, I think that will have to be from code. So you can access panels through code and then move them or change anything. We're gonna get into that later. You can set anchor points on assets and just change the anchors, like change which corner of the panel it's anchored to. And as for panels, they work a bit differently. So like I said, it's all appearing in the center because of the parent flex panel that contains these flex panels. And the first thing I'm going to mention before anything is You see how they appear vertically, so it's like a column. Are UI elements a separate asset or just objects? So flex panels are not assets, but flex panels are separate things inside UI layers, and you put your sprites and objects inside those panels. So you're still making use of the normal assets. So there's no new asset type. So it's appearing as a column vertically. It's because of this setting over here. I'm pointing like you can see on my monitor, but it's because of this setting, the column. If you change it to row, you can see it appears horizontally now. And there's column reverse or row reverse, and this will make more sense. Like if I go into the first sprite and let me just change its color. Now if I set the main layers direction to column reverse, you can see how that goes to the end. And if you have row and you have row reverse, so now you can see how that changes things. Sorry. So if you have it set to column, then it's laid out vertically, and that's the main axis. That's the main axis of the layout. And the axis that is perpendicular to that, so the x-axis, that is the x-axis in this case, that is the cross axis. So there's the main axis where it's laid out, and then there's the cross axis. So because our main axis here is vertical, because it's set to column, justify content is the setting that defines how it's laid out on the main axis. So right now it's set to center, so it's centered. If I set it to flex start, it goes right to the start of that axis. If I set it to flex end, it goes right to the end of the main axis. Then there's like space between, and there's space around, space evenly. So a lot of options for you to go and like lay it out on the main axis. Then there's the cross axis, which is perpendicular to the main axis, and that the align items property is what defines the layout there. So if I set this to flex start, on the cross axis it goes to the start. If I set this to flex end, it goes to flex end. There's stretch, not really sure what that does, but there's these options, and that's these options are really gonna be important when you're working on your layouts. And if you're wondering, like if I'm setting the cross axis to start and it's going to the left side, why is it going to the left? Like what defines that start is left? And that is the direction, the layout direction here. So if you set the layout direction from right to left, then start becomes right. But obviously you're gonna want to keep the layout direction to just one option and just work with that. So I'm gonna keep this at center like it was, because the thing that we're gonna work on is gonna be centered. UI is shareable between rooms. Yeah, once you make a UI layer, it exists throughout your game. Doesn't matter what room. Would UI layers be more or less CPU efficient than using a draw GUI event? It would be a bit more because there's more happening, but it wouldn't be enough for most developers to worry about it. So then there's other flex settings, like you can define a gap, and like that's the gap between these items. But let me see what's next on my list. Right. Um, then you can have flex panels inside flex panels. So I'm just gonna right click here and add a flex panel myself. And when that's added, it's added with the default size of 100 by 100. So it's not gonna be auto by default. When you when you make a flex panel by yourself without dropping it there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take all these three flex panels that I made and I'm gonna drop them inside the new flex panel that I've made just now. And I'm gonna set the size of that flex panel to auto so that it resizes to its contents. So, well, I haven't got snack, but I've got a drink, if that counts. So I've got these three flex panels inside the flex panel. That's inside the layer. And so if I duplicate this main flex panel now, we now have two of these, and I can have these two laid out differently. Like I can have these two laid out in a row, or I can have them spaced like this, like with space between. And so now you have structures inside structures where the main layer has a row layout with this kind of spacing, and then that has these little flex panels. And so this is really the foundation of making layouts with this system. And obviously, the main thing that it takes care of for you is displaying it on the GUI layer so it's not in your room. So you don't have to draw GUI events yourself. And you can see where you're placing buttons. That's the foundation of this. So you make panels and you put objects inside it. So we're gonna make the pause menu that I showed you guys before. We're gonna get started on that just now. It's a snack you can drink. Yeah, you're right, right? So for that menu, I first need a box that has those buttons that I showed you. So I have a sprite from that. For that, I'm just gonna take it and drop it here, and I'm gonna set the direction to column and the justify content to center. And for this, I'm not gonna resize the asset like I did before and make the flex panel react to that. I'm gonna do it the opposite way, where I'm gonna set a size for the flex panel. I'm gonna make the asset react to that. So I'll change the size of the flex panel to pixels. So I changed the type of it from auto to pixels, and let's see what kind of size works for us. Yeah, I think 800 by 600 is good. And I know the line is very faint, but maybe you're able to see it on the stream. The flex panel is a box right here. And will I be able to build virtual buttons for mobile devices? Yeah, as long as you can get your layout, a layout that you're happy with, your panels can just have objects that are the buttons. So it just helps you lay it out. Thank you, one player mode. Yeah, the blue lines is a bit rough. Yeah, if I disable the background now, it should be better. Will there be pre-made elements? Yes. So this is also a system to lay out your objects, right? But we're gonna come out with prefab assets. So prefabs are also something that's in beta, which is like you can import assets from other projects. And we're gonna be releasing prefab assets, which are objects that are like buttons and sliders and like checkboxes, radio buttons. And this is something we're gonna be rolling out slowly. And I know that a button prefab is one of the first things to come soon, and all of that is gonna make use of this system. So yeah, we will be releasing prefab assets that you can just drop in, and you have a functioning button, and you just assign a function to it, and that's what it does. So we're gonna have that. So I set the size of the flex panel to 800 by 600, and you can see it, but the sprite that I added inside it is still a bit small. It's the same size that it was, but I can go into the properties of that sprite. At the end, I can enable stretch. You can enable it like for the width, or you can enable it for the height, or you can enable it for both axes, or you can say whether it should maintain its aspect ratio, which I don't want. But I've set it to resize itself, to stretch itself on both axes. So the flex panel has its size of 800 by 600, and the sprite inside it is now resizing itself to fit the flex panel. So now it's time to add the buttons. I'm gonna make an object for that, obj button, and I'll assign a sprite to it, and I'll also go and make a font because we need that to actually use text inside of the flex panels. So this size should do fine for now. So back in the room, I'm gonna first of all just drop a button. So the button object, I'm gonna drop it inside this flex panel that I made for my pause menu. And yo, Satan, what's up? So there's a flex panel that's been added now for the button, and for this, I'm not gonna be I'm not gonna make the size of this flex panel based on the button. We're gonna do something different here. We're gonna make it based on the font or on the text that we add here. I'm just gonna name these panels. So this one I can just name um, menu panel, and this one I'll just call button, which has the button object. What I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna take the font asset, I'm gonna drop it inside the button panel, and now that's been added into its own flex panel here. So I'll just call this text. And here is the thing that I want to highlight. That's really important. So far, we've been using flex panels that have one asset inside it, and it's worked okay. And you can see like when you have multiple flex panels inside a flex panel, they are either laid out vertically as a column or they are laid out horizontally as a row. Like you've seen that they don't overlap. But this is a limitation of the system. If you have a flex panel and an asset on the same level inside a flex panel, you can see that they're overlapping, right? They're not being laid out separately like in a line. So here, so that's just one thing to know, right? If you have a flex panel and an asset inside a flex panel at the same level, it's not gonna work like you expect with two flex panels. Or even if you have two assets, they're still gonna overlap if you have them at the same level. But what I'm gonna do here is, so what's happening here is it's ignoring the button because there's a flex panel at the same level. And so the flex panel that is housing both of these things is using the size of the flex panel to calculate its size. It's ignoring the object. And that's what I want here. I want it to be resized based on the text flex panel. So for the object, I'm just gonna ask it to stretch so that it fits the flex panel. I don't want anything more from it. And and because you know this is an object, it's gonna stretch its mask as well, so you can use mouse events on it. We'll get into that as well. It would be cool to support fonts in other languages as well. I think there should be support for that. So do test it. I think there should be support for that. I haven't tested that personally. So you can see that the panel is resizing to the text. I want this first one to be the resume button, so I'll just call it that. And it's looking a bit like it's crowding on the text. So I'm gonna go on the button panel that has both of these things, the button and the text. And now we're gonna change the padding. So the padding is the area across all the edges that's added inside an element, and the margin inside a panel. And the margin is the area across all edges that's added outside the panel. I want padding here. So I'm just gonna change this, enable this to change all sides at the same time. And if I set this to 16, uh, you can see now it looks much better because it has that padding there. And I am gonna change it for each side separately so that we have a bit more padding horizontally than we have vertically. And this is looking nice. The chat frequency has really slowed down, so I think everyone's really locked in on this. So I have a button here that has an object, so we are set to actually set up any interaction with that because we have an object, right? So I'll just, yeah, right. It is pretty much like CSS flexboxes. So if you're familiar with any web development, like if you've done CSS at all, this is pretty much that. So I'll call this resume button, and I'll duplicate that and duplicate it again. And now we've got three buttons, and you can see how it's being laid out in a line. So it just takes care of that for you, right? The second one's gonna be a pause button, so I'll change the, sorry, not a pause button, but a settings button. So I'm gonna change the name of that panel. I'll change the name of the last panel to quit button because it's gonna be a quit button. And now I can go and change the actual text inside there as well. So it's like it takes a minute to set up these things, but once you've got them set up, uh, it's pretty easy to just duplicate them and lay them out. So you have these three panels. So if I just close that, right, it's like you kind of forget what's inside there. You don't have to worry about it. Uh, After all of this is calculated, this panel has a size that's that factors into the main panel and how it's laid out with in relation to the other panels. Like there's a lot going on in terms of calculations. If I select the menu panel, I want a gap between these buttons. So if I set the vertical gap here to something like 20, that gap is added. Hi Mridul, what's up? And let me just run this again. And we have the menu. Right, let me check. Make sure that I'm covering everything that was on my list. Right. So now we can actually start programming interaction with this. So one great thing about this new system is these are just objects, right? All the mouse events work with this. So if I go into the obj button object and I add a mouse enter event which runs when you hover your mouse on the object, and I add a mouse leave event. By the way, if you're wondering like what this editor is, if you've not seen this before, this is code editor 2. Like if you follow the RPG series at all, at the start of that we use this as well. So you can just go and enable this if you're on the beta. This is only on beta. If we have a persistent object drawing all our GUI elements, would there be an advantage to scrapping that for this system instead? So the advantage I see is being able to lay out your interface in an editor instead of having to code it. And okay, so that's a nice thing, right? You can see what you're doing right inside GameMaker. You don't have to code and then run the game. But then also, in terms of the layouts, there's so much that it takes care of, right? Because like here, I'm not having to worry about the positions of where this is on the screen or like doing any calculations. It's doing all of it for me. So that would be a reason to move over to this. So for the button, I added the mouse enter and mouse leave. If I set the image alpha to something like that here and reset it back to 1, let me just run this and you can see it's working, right? So you can make use of these mouse events, and if you add like a left pressed event, then you can just program what happens. But we need to know, yeah, you can use like percentages, and we're gonna get into that as well. But yeah, before programming what a button does, we need to know what button it is. So we need a variable. I'm gonna like there are multiple ways to do this. I'm gonna do it the simplest way, like just make a number variable, and you have button 0, button 1, button 2, button 3. So we're gonna do just that. So I'm gonna add a variable called button ID, set to -1 by default and make it an integer. Then in the room, I'm just gonna go to these buttons individually, and like if I click on this button, its variables are gonna show up here. So it's pretty much like adding any instance in the room. You can change its variables, and you can also add creation code if you want. But if you just want to change the value of variables, then you're not gonna need to do that at all. So its default should be -1. I think I said that. And here, the first button, the resume button, I can set that to 0. The second button, I can set that to 1. Third button, I can set that to 2. So if you made UIs before, you must have done something like this, right? To give each instance a separate ID. And now you can just program that in the left pressed event just based on what the button ID is. So if you got 0, then didn't copy this, yeah, and then 1 and then 2, and because I know 2 is the quit button, I can just ask it to end the game. So I don't know what you mean by does it also work by using arrows? Oh, do you mean like with the keyboard? No, it's not gonna work like that on its own. That's something you're gonna have to program on your own, because this doesn't offer any actual interface interaction. This is just for layout and where things are drawn. All the interaction that you want is gonna have to be based on objects and your code. So like you can see here, I've been adding mouse events and doing that. What happens if the button changes position? I don't know what you mean. Like, do you mean changing the X and Y variables? Because that might not work, because then the layout will just override the position. And we'll get into moving things around in code. So for the button with the ID 2, I've asked it to end the game. And clicking on the other buttons does nothing. If I click on quit, then the game ends. So we have some basic interaction going. I'm gonna enable the background again, but I'll just make it a bit dark, just so there's at least something there, right? Right. So we have a basic interface right now, but the interface is all that the game is right now. Now I'm gonna work on how you can actually toggle this at runtime, like how you can make this appear when you want it to appear. So let's make a new object. Let's just call it obj pause manager, and let's not forget to put it in the room like I always do. And for the pause manager, I'm just gonna program a basic, uh, not really a pause feature, but just something to toggle between two states. So we need a variable that stores if the game is paused or not. Then I'm gonna make a function that actually controls what happens if you pause or unpause your game. And then we just need step event code to switch between the two states. So I'm gonna check if the escape key is pressed. Then I'm gonna invert the value of paused. So if it's true, it becomes false. If it's false, it becomes true. Then um, then you call the update pause function. So now in the update pause function, you can read that paused value, and you can just do whatever you want with it. So if the game was paused, fix that. Then we do that. If it was unpaused, then we do this. And what I want to do is, when we pause the game, I want to make the UI layer appear, and when we unpause the game, we want to make the UI layer disappear. So every UI layer has a name, and if you're gonna be modifying it at runtime, you're gonna get the handle of the layer through its name, right? So I'm just gonna change its name to pause menu, and that's what I'm gonna read at runtime. So I'm gonna make a variable for the layer name, pause menu. And now when we pause the game, we just call layer set visible, and we take the layer name, and then we set this to true so that the layer becomes visible. And if you have unpaused the game, then we make the layer invisible. And with UI layers, the way it works is, it's not like it's just making it invisible. It's actually gonna deactivate your UI layer objects, the instances that you have in there. So it's effectively like disabling and enabling a layer. So it's like if you have buttons there and you make the layer invisible, you can't click on the buttons anymore, right? And it's not gonna run any of its step events anymore either, so it saves on that performance as well. And I'm gonna not gonna set it to invisible. I'm just gonna call the update pause function right at the start so that it sees that the game is unpaused, and it just does whatever it needs to, which is making the layer invisible. So let's see if it works at all, because like I've been coding but I haven't tested it. Let's see how many errors I get. So the layer doesn't appear by default. If I press escape, it appears. If I press escape, it disappears. I'm gonna make the object in the background a bit slower. It's going a bit too fast. So see how enabling and disabling of the layer is working. So this is something that you're gonna be using a lot if you start using UI layers, because you need to control when your UI layers appear and when they disappear. So layer set visible is gonna be your friend for that. So we have that. We can also program our resume button to actually resume it for us. So that should be pretty simple. If I go into obj button and I've got a case for the first button, which is a resume button, I can refer to obj pause manager. I can set pause to false. Then I can refer to it again and I can call the update pause function, and you can probably consolidate these things into one. Like you can pass this as an argument and just change the variable in the function itself. That's a better way to do it, but for now this is what we've got. We're setting pause to false, we are calling the function, and that should do it for us. So if I hit escape and then I click on resume, you can see it just calls the function in the pause manager. Like it's not trying to do anything by itself, right? This is just calling the same function that's called when you press escape, and it's just calling it again, and we now have this here. And one small thing I wanna get into. So you're saying about the order in the UI folder. So within the UI layer, how you order your assets, it matters in terms of the order. And between multiple UI layers, it will matter as well. But I don't think you'll really have multiple UI layers visible at the same time, unless it's like one is for HUD and one is for a menu. But like here, I've got a text above the button in the list, and you can see the text here. If I take the button and I put it above the text, then the text disappears. So the order that you uh, make here, it matters. So the thing I was gonna get into is right now these buttons are resizing based on the size of the text, and you might not like that, so you can set a fixed size for it. So this is a button panel, right, and it's resizing based on the text panel. You can set a fixed size here by changing it to pixels, or you can use a combination where you have a minimum size that it should be, but if the text is larger, then it should grow beyond that. And for that stuff, you have like minimum size here and you have maximum size. So if I set the minimum width for this to, let's say, 200, let's say 250, and you can see it grows a little, right? So it's going to use 250 as a minimum size, but as a minimum size it can grow beyond that because the size is still set to automatic. So if I go and I change this, uh, and you can see it just gets larger and larger, and you can even set a maximum size so it doesn't grow beyond that size. And the function I defined was unique to the object. Yes, it was. So it was defined in obj pause manager, and because I was calling it from obj button, I used the dot operator. Well, yeah, you can now go and set the minimum size for the other buttons as well. So I'll use 220, and I'll set the minimum size to 220 for all of these buttons. And you can see now it looks nicer. Pop-up dialog. Yeah, you can make a pop-up dialog. I mean, this is basically a pop-up dialog, isn't it? It just pops up in the center. So we have got a menu basically working. Let's see what else. Yeah, I wanna show how the responsiveness works for this. I need to make the window resizable, so let's enable that first. So allow window resize. And first of all, before we try responsiveness in the runner, you can just experiment with responsiveness in the editor by just changing the size here. Like if I set this to say 1080p, this is how it's gonna appear. Then there's like 4K, or you can just set a custom size and you can change the orientation. So this is how it would appear on mobile. So you can just experiment with these different sizes here, but I'm gonna show you in the runner as well. So the window should be resizable now, and right now if I make it bigger or if I make it smaller, it is remaining the exact same size as the game itself, because by default the GUI layer that this is based on, that it's using the size of, is not really changing its size based on the game window. Like it's remaining the same. So even though our panel had a defined size, it's just shrinking and growing, and this is not what I would call responsive. This is not responsive. To test that, I'm just gonna make the GUI layer expand and contract like, based on the window size. Are there any other UI components except buttons? So right now, like these buttons aren't built into GameMaker. Like I've programmed them myself, but we're gonna have prefabs rolling out slowly with like pre-made buttons that you can drop in and pre-made like other UI elements. So that's gonna come soon. But yeah, as long as you objects are concerned, you can program anything. Can we customize breakpoints for responsive layouts? I'm not sure what you mean by breakpoints, because I don't think you're talking about like debugger breakpoints, right? So I want to make this responsive. I want to make the GUI layer actually change its size based on the window. So I'm just gonna call display set GUI maximize. I see we are an hour into this and I haven't even finished like my first example. So I think this is gonna be long, but I'm going slow because I wanna make sure that like we understand what is happening here, right? And that there's a lot this system, so there's a lot to understand. So I'm just gonna call display set GUI maximize here. It's not the best idea to call this every like in the step event, like every frame. I'm not saying this is gonna kill your performance, but like not good practice, right? But just for this test, I'm gonna call this in the step event, and it's gonna make the GUI layer just resize according to the window. So now, if I make this larger, you can see the behavior now is different from before. Like if you make the window smaller or you make it larger, the panel is just staying the same size. And this is just how this specific panel works, like how we have programmed it. It's staying the same size because we gave it a fixed size. And if you go in the editor, you can see I gave it a size of 800 by 600. So as the GUI layer actually expands and contracts, it's staying the same size, right? So this is one very basic example of responsiveness where like making it really small isn't necessarily nice, but it's doing something in relation to changing it. And so if you have a small monitor, it's going to look like this. If you have a big monitor, it's going to look like this. And then there are multiple ways to program how this would work. So for example, I'm gonna, instead of using a fixed size, what if we make it like a percentage? of the parent panel. So I have 800 by 600 here, right? But I'm gonna change it to percentage. When you change it to percentage, or if you change it like between percentage and pixels, it's gonna just calculate a value for the new unit so that in the end it remains the same size. That's why if I switch between these, it doesn't change how it looks because it's GameMaker is doing the conversion for us. Responsive breakpoint, pixel dimensions at which responsive layouts change presets. So I don't think we have something like that where you can define resolutions, but you can define like minimum sizes and maximum sizes and work with that. And if you do think like a system like that would be nice, I think it would be nice to make a feature request because I think something like that could be nice. So for the percentage, I'm just gonna set it to 100%, and you can see how it's now covering the whole panel, the UI layer. And if you run the game, it's gonna be the same, it's covering everything, right? Now to have like a gap between the edge of the window and this, I can go into the main layer and I can add a padding on all edges. Let's say like 32 or let's say 64. So now it's using 100% of the area that it has minus the padding. So if I run it now, you have a padding on the side. And now what's happening is now the panel is resizing. So unlike before, it's not staying in the same size, right? Because we don't have a fixed size anymore. But now it's respecting that 64 pixel padding no matter how large the window is. And the panel is just stretching 100% to fill the area that it has. And then you can do a combination of this, like using a percentage size and using a fixed pixel size as a minimum and as a maximum. So we can define the minimum size that it must have and the maximum size that it can have. So I can go into the panel settings and let's say I gave it a minimum size of 600 by 300, and let's see how that works. So it's maintaining that size, right? It's not letting the padding shrink it down beyond what its minimum size should be. And then if you go and program like a maximum size, let's say 1,000, no, that's too low. Let's say like 1400 by 800 something. Let's see if I can actually test that on here. Right, so as I make the window larger, it's respecting that max size that I set. And if I make it smaller, then it's affecting that minimum size that I set. But I'm gonna remove that minimum size for now just to test something. Let me take a look at the chat, what's happening. So one thing I want to show is when you make the window really small, you can see how the buttons overflow the panel. And an easy fix for that, not to stop it overflowing, but to stop it from looking broken, is to enable clip contents. And that's not gonna render anything that's outside of the flex panel area. So if I make this really small, you can see like you can't see the buttons beyond the flex panel area. So this makes it look less broken, right? Like if you saw this compared to what you were seeing before, this looks at least like nicer. So there's that. Like if you have a responsive layout, I say it is important to enable this, just so any items that overflow, they don't actually overflow visibly and look weird. Then we have options for wrapping, which also has to do with overflow. Like if your list is overflowing, then if it's overflowing on the main axis, then it jumps to the cross axis, which is like if you have text, if you're writing a document on the main axis, if it overflows, it goes to the next line, right, which is on the cross axis. So it's like that. So if I go in the menu panel and I enable the wrapping option, and it's gonna change the alignment on the cross axis. So I'll just set it to center again. So it just changes which property it's using for the alignment on the cross axis. But I've enabled wrapping now. So let's see what that does. I'll run the game, and if I make it really small, you can see that once it's overflowing, it's actually jumping on to the next line. And you can see there's no gap horizontally, so you can add a horizontal gap at the end there. Can we make scrolling UIs with this? Yes, we're gonna touch on that in this stream. What about clicking on an item that is clipped? Good question. So the gap is there. And you asked what about clicking on an item that is clipped? Right, I was still able to click on the quit button uh, when it was clipped. So I guess that has to do with your buttons interactions, because you're programming the interactions yourself. So there's that. And now we're gonna make our second UI layer. Right, so we've got the resume button working, we've got the quit button working. Let's make the settings panel. Before I do that, I'm just gonna reset this. But in conclusion, like what I showed you with all these settings, like wrapping and clip contents and setting the minimum size and maximum size, all of that has to do with responsiveness and just making your interface responsive to different sizes. And then you can just go and test it, especially if you're making a game that's both like on both desktop and mobile, then you can test here. And even if you're making just a desktop game, it's good to have responsiveness, because people have different monitors. And if you don't have a responsive layout, then if someone's monitor or someone's resolution is lower, then the buttons are going to be smaller for them, which is not nice. So responsiveness just sort of helps you make sure that if there's a big screen here and it's a small screen here, then they appear the same size. And here the display set GUI maximize function helped us with that, just to make sure the GUI layer actually stretches to the display, and then your responsiveness comes into play. So let's work on the settings menu now. Let me just, so you can disable make your UI layers invisible with this button. And now I'm just gonna go and add another UI layer. We are designing our settings menu, so I'll call this settings menu. And the first thing I want here is a panel, so let's add that. Just call this panel, and I want this to cover the whole screen, so I'll set the size of this panel to 100%, and I'll make the sprite inside it stretch to fit the panel. But obviously you don't actually want it covering the whole screen, right? So let's add a padding to the parent panel. Let's say 32 pixels. So if you run the game, this should appear. Yeah. And the first thing I'm gonna do is make program switching between these both of these layers, just to show you how you can go from the pause menu into the settings menu and then come back. And actually this is like, it's gonna be really easy to do. So in the panel that I have here, let me add a button. Let's design a button in the same way that we did before, or we can actually just take a button element from one of these. So if I just duplicate this and I put it in the new panel and I put it above the back sprite, I have a button here. So I'll rename this to back button, because this button will take us back into the pause menu, and let's call it back. And before working on a layout, I'm gonna work on a layout, but before that, let me set the value of this button to 3, because we already programmed these 3 buttons, right? So 0, 1 and 2. So this one is gonna have the ID 3. So I've set that here. GameMaker and make games, but when will it make makers? Make makers make game, GameMaker when make game. So GameMaker. So I added this button here with the ID 3. I don't want it to be centered. I want the settings menu to be laid out like a list, and be like from top to bottom, and just be on the left side. So let's set the direction is column. That is fine, that's what I want. Let's set this and this to flex start, right? So this is the main axis, this is a cross axis, and both axes I want it to be flex start. So it's being laid out at the start now, so that is nice, but it's right at the start, like really at the edge. I need a padding, so let's add a padding to this panel, right? So again, this back button is inside this panel, so that's why I'm adding the padding to this panel. I'm adding the padding to the button, so not to the button, to the panel that has the button. Just like when I needed a padding for this panel, I added it to the layer that's above it. So I'm gonna add a padding here on all sides, and it's looking nicer. Now when I run the game, the first thing I want is for this layer to not be visible, so I'm gonna make the settings menu layer invisible by default. So we got that covered, right? Now if you hit settings, nothing happens because we haven't programmed it. But what we want to happen is when you click on settings, we want to go into the settings menu, and that sounds like a tough problem, but with this it's actually really easy. So this is the button that I have for the settings button, right? This is the ID that I have for that. what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna set the pause menu layer to invisible by setting it to false. Then I'm gonna set the settings menu layer to visible by setting it to true. And that's all you need. So if I click on settings now, it opens the settings menu. That's it. Like, I really love this part. So it's like, because when I used to program interfaces by myself, this was like one of these things, like managing states and going between these things. So that makes it really easy. And now if you want to come back, because the back button in the settings menu had a ID of 3, I can just use the same logic and set the pause menu to visible and set the settings menu to invisible, and that's it. So now we have a flow. So you go into your pause menu, you click on settings, you click on back, and now you now have a flow. And it was really easy to set up, because all you had to do was just make a layer invisible and make another layer visible, and it took care of everything, like removing the buttons and making this button active and everything. So that's cool. One thing is, if I go into the settings and I press escape, um, I know it will sort of mess up your flow, because you can see, like, okay, right now it's not pausing the game, like it's still moving in the background. So that is something that I forgot to do, but it's really simple. So if you go into your pause manager, when you pause the game, I'm gonna deactivate all the objects apart from the current one. And when you unpause the game, I'm gonna activate all objects. So that's a really basic pause mechanism. So now you can see the background is moving. If I hit escape, it stops because the object stops. And this is a bug right now. I know it only happens when you have the pause menu layer set to invisible here. But if I set it to visible, it should be okay. I've reported that bug, so it should be good. But so if you pause the game here and you go into settings and you press escape, it unpauses in the back, but the settings menu doesn't disappear. So I think that's also pretty basic. If you have unpaused the game, then you just set the settings menu layer to invisible as well. So just in the same event, you do that. So now if I pause, I go into settings and I press escape, it just removes everything. So we have a basic flow now, and with this you can just program as many menus as you want. Like, you go into the settings, then there's multiple buttons here, like video settings and audio settings, and you click on video settings and it enables a different layer that has those options. So you can make your flow with this. Let's make a few settings just so like those settings won't be usable, but just so I can show you how it would be laid out, right? Is it possible to have an actual transition though? So right now, with what we have, if you want a transition, like if you want the menu to slide in or move in, that's something you can do with code yourself. So it's the same thing you would have to do if you had your own system here. So this doesn't really offer any transitions right now. So I have the back button in this. Let's define some settings, and for that I'm gonna add a flex panel, because I want for each setting for there to be a text description and a button, which can be like a checkbox or it can be anything else, right? And I'm gonna call this setting 1, this flex panel inside the setting panel, and I'm gonna set its width to 100%, and I'm gonna set its height to 64. So we've got a panel that is fully stretched horizontally, but vertically it's just 64 pixels because these settings are gonna be laid out vertically. So inside this panel that I've created, let's add some text, and let's make this a setting, like let's say enable subtitles, and it's appearing in the center. I'll take care of that later, but let me call this panel text, and let's add a button here as well. I'll put this under the text panel. I'll call this button, and I'll keep it the same size. So you can see we have a text, we have a button, and to lay it out properly inside the setting panel that I made, that I set to stretch horizontally, I'll first set the direction to row, so that's looking better. And then I'm gonna set the justify content, which is on the main axis, which is row, to space between. And now it looks like a settings menu that you may have seen in other games, where you have the text on the left side and you have the button on the right side. If you use flex panel node style set display to set it to none, then will the objects be deactivated? I don't know, I have not tested that. Like, what I do know is if you make a layer invisible, it will deactivate all the instances inside it. I don't know if the display property affects that. Wouldn't layer shaders work on this? I don't think so, because if you select a UI layer, there's no option for filters, and if you add a filter layer in the room, then it only affects layers that are below that, and those are going to be room layers, and UI layers are like above that. So I don't think that's going to work. I've not tested that. So I added the setting, and you can just then duplicate that, and you have multiple settings. And then you can add a gap, a vertical gap, and then you have a nice list. And you can then call this like setting 2, and you can change the text to be some other setting, like enable God mode or something. And then when you want these buttons to actually work, you can do a similar thing to how we did in the pause menu, where every button has an ID, and then if you click on it, it checks its ID. So you can have that here as well, where these have IDs, and you just click on it, and based on the ID it does something. So that's like one way to program UIs in this, right? So you lay out your flex panels, and then you have given these instances IDs, and then you just check in the mouse event, and then you can do whatever you want with that button ID. So let's just test this in the game. So you can see that it's appearing here as we wanted, and yeah, we have this whole flow. So this is working nicely. In the description of this stream, there is a link to sample projects, and one of those has this sample. It's called the pause menu sample, and it has a settings menu which has working checkboxes and sliders. And so you can go and check that out after the stream and just take a look at how that was done. It has sliders and checkboxes. Do I have that project? I think I might have that project actually, just to show it. Let me try and load that. Right, so if I press escape, this menu pops up, which is basically what we programmed here, but it has a icon here, which is again pretty simple. Like the button, instead of just having text that we added in our project, it also has a panel with an icon, and it's just laid out in a row layout, so it's appearing like horizontally next to each other. So doing that is also pretty simple. So if you hit escape and go into the settings, yeah, this is the project I was talking about, which has like functioning checkboxes and sliders. This slider for some reason is not working, but it must be some bug with the beta version that I'm using, because I'm sure it was working yesterday. But you can download this project and just check it out. And the same link in the description also has other projects as well that you can just look at, like how things were done. But let's get into our project and let's move on to the next thing. I want to show you viewport layers. So right now what we are using is display layer, where if you set the game view to display, which is default, you're just gonna have the UI layer appearing just once. And you can also use the viewport option, and that's useful if you have multiple viewports in your game, if you're making a split screen game. So viewports, what I'm talking about is when you are making a split screen game and you have separate views in your game window, so each view is a viewport. And if you set a UI layer to viewports, then it's going to appear on all of those viewports. So we are going to test that just now. Let me go and add, well, this already has a camera, but I'm going to make it a bit smaller. Let's say 800 by 500, because we are going to make multiple viewports. I'm going to make four viewports. So I've said that it's size to 800 by 500, and I've set the viewport size to 800 by 500. So this is the final size of the viewport on the screen. So let's go and add more viewports as well. So again, 800 by 500. This one's gonna be positioned 800 pixels to the right. And then let's add another. This is gonna be 500 pixels below the like the top edge. And then let's add another, again the same size, and it's gonna be starting from the center of the window, being in the bottom right. And let's also make this follow object 1. And now if you run the game, I hope you can see that we have 4 different viewports, because this one is moving, this one is moving, these are not moving. I think I can make this a bit easier to see if I add a bit of a gap between these. So if I make this be at, not here, if I add like a 20 pixel gap between these, That should make it easier for you guys to actually see. Right, let's check this. Right, now you have a gap. And now that you have multiple viewports, now if I press escape, it's still appearing just once because it's set as a display layer. And that's what we want from this if you have a pause menu. But if you want something separately on each viewport, then you can make a viewport layer. So let's make a new layer and let's call this HUD, because if you have separate viewports, then you want each viewport to have its own HUD, right? And with this selected, you set the game view to viewports, and in the list it goes into a different category of viewports, and it appears here. And let's add something here. I'm gonna add a new object for hearts because I wanna make like a basic heart system, and I don't have a heart sprite, so let me actually make one real quick. Right, so set the origin to top left, and let me assign that sprite to this object. So we have an object now, we can put that in the viewport layer, and let me just disable these. So the HUD layer, it's gonna drop the heart in here, and this is in the center, which I don't want. So let's set it to flex start, and let's set a padding on all sides, and let's set the direction to row so that if I duplicate this, you have the hearts laid out horizontally. You can add a gap so that it looks a bit nicer. And if you run the game now, the hearts are appearing on each viewport separately. And now if you press escape, the menu, ignore that bug right now, that menu appears in the center of the whole window, but these hearts are appearing separately. So that is nice. It does disappear when I hit escape, and it's because I'm calling instance deactivate all, and it's deactivating those instances as well. So if you don't want them to be deactivated, then you can like reactivate them after you've deactivated all objects. You can do that manually. So this is just to show you these two types of UI layers that you can have. And mostly you're going to be working with display layers because I don't think most people here are making split screen games. So for your UI or HUD, just use display layers if you just have a like a basic single player game. But these are useful if you have viewport, it's like split screen games. Now I am gonna dive into that a bit as well and show you if I was making a game and I needed hearts, how I would do it. Because you can modify these structures, these layouts at runtime. You have the functions for that, and we're gonna get into that a bit as well. But this, if you want multiple hearts to appear here and you want it to be dynamic, then this is not really that useful. So what I would do is I would use a hybrid approach. Like I'm gonna place the heart here, but how many hearts appear is gonna be based on code. So I'm using like a hybrid approach where I am using UI layers for the layout and the size of this, but then in the object I'm gonna use code like for loops like you would use normally to display these hearts. Can we decide which viewport layer is drawn to? No, not right now. But in an object, you can change how it appears or whether it appears at all based on the view that it's rendering to right now. And we are gonna get into that right now because I want each viewport to render a different number of hearts. And like I said, I'm gonna take a hybrid approach here, right? So if I go into the hearts object and let's just add the draw event. Now I'm adding the draw event because I want to change how this appears. I want to change what it's drawing. I want to use a for loop to draw multiple hearts. Uh, I think you might know what I'm talking about if you've ever drawn hearts before like this. But why have I added a draw event? Because why am I not using like draw GUI event or something else? I know like this layer is not on the GUI layer, it's on a viewport. But even if this was a display layer on the GUI layer, you would still use a draw event. Because when you use a draw event, it just replaces what's drawn inside the space that it's in. So if you add a draw event here and it's a display layer rendering to the GUI layer, this is still gonna render to the GUI layer. It's still gonna render in the same place that the instance would have normally drawn on. And for that reason, draw GUI events are actually disabled in instances that are inside UI layers because there's no use of that now. Because if you want to update how that UI layer instance is being drawn, you just use a draw event and it just updates where it's drawing. So let's go into the draw event and let's add a basic for loop. Let's say to draw 4 hearts. And you want the X position to be different for each heart. So you started at the X that it's at. And if you've done this before, you know this basic code. And then you take, let's say, the sprite width. So this takes into account any scaling that's applied to the instance. And let's add a bit of a gap of 20 pixels. So you can see I'm taking a hybrid approach here where I've used UI layers for the basic layout, like where it is and how large it is. But then I have a bit of code, do it the classic way, if you will. Then you just do a draw sprite ext with the sprite of the instance at the position and with the scale that's applied to it. And let's just set the rest of it to default. And let's try this. And you can see now 4 hearts are being drawn. And now this is dynamically controlled because you have 4 here. So you can just swap that in for a variable, which we're gonna do just now. And it's all dynamic there. And I know you still, with this approach that I'm taking, you're still using a for loop, but you're not having to worry about where it's drawn or what the size is. Like, because it's using the sprite width, if I go here and if I make this really large, I can control that from the UI layers. And like where it appears, I can change as well. Like if I just move it here, so UI layers are still helping me just decide where I want it to be. And in the code, I don't have to worry about any coordinates and where I'm drawing things. So that is nice. But Right now, the issue is that every view is drawing the same number of hearts. And how do you fix that? So let me make an object called obj data, and this has the number of hearts for, let's say, all the different four players. So let's say hearts for player 0 is 3, then hearts for player 1 is 5, and then you have like 2 hearts, and then you have 1 heart, or you can just define it like this. And now when you want to pull the player from this array in your heart object, you use the view current variable, because this is a viewport layer and we are in the draw event, so it's gonna have the view that it's drawing to. So here if I go obj data dot hearts view current, I think this should work. Let me just drop obj data into the room, and let's see, and it's working. So it has a different number of different number of hearts depending on the viewport. And so if you are using instances like this to render HUD to different views, then you can use the view current variable. And then I think someone was asking if you can assign a viewport layer to a specific viewport. You can just make it not draw if you're in a specific viewport, right? You can program logic like that. And I also want to show how to program like a health bar. I'm gonna just do that in a basic UI layer. So let me just disable this layer, and let me disable the other viewports. So you can go back to, now that I've shown you viewport layers, let's just go back to having basic one viewport setup, and let's see how that's looking. Right, so we are back to that, and I want to show you how to program a basic like a health bar. Let's see, let me add a new layer for that and just make this one invisible. So let's call this I already have a HUD, but let's say HUD2 for now. Right, and here let's see how I want to do this. So let me add like the health bar is gonna have two parts to it, something in the background and something in the foreground, and the foreground is what's gonna move. So let me use this sprite as the background of that. So I'm gonna call this the HP bar, and let me set the alignment, and let me also set the padding so it appears here. And I want this to have a fixed size, so let's give it a pixel size. Let's say it's 64 pixels tall and 400 pixels wide. We're just defining this here, but when we program our bar, we're not gonna have to worry about the exact pixel size. So that's another one of nice things here, like not having to worry about how many pixels something is in your code. I want this to stretch, so let's make it stretch. And so that is the back of the bar, and now I want the front of the bar, which will need to be an object because you want it to be dynamic. You want it to change its size. So let's make a bar object. We are getting closer to like 2 hours of this stream, which is much longer than I uh, expected. But yeah, it's because there's so much to cover, I never was actually gonna know how long this is gonna take, which is fine. But 2 hours of constant speaking is like, yeah, my throat is a bit tired now. So, but yeah, I'll power through. Thanks, Tyrell. So we have obj bar, and let's put this here. I'm gonna drop it into the HP bar panel, and for this panel, let me first of all make the object stretch to the panel, and then let me set the size of the panel to 100% on both axes. So the size of the panel that I've just added, let's call this HP fill because this is the fill of the bar, right? I've made it stretch to fit the HP bar. So the HP bar is set to 400 by 64 and the HP fill is set to 100%. So it's taking up all the space that it can. And the object is just stretching to fit the flex panel that it's in. So like if you disable this, you can see that they are the same size now. But the nice thing here is this HP fill panel now has a percentage size. So this is 100%, so it's fully filling the bar. If we set it to 50%, well, it's centered. So let's set the alignment to flex start in the parent panel. So getting back to the size, because I've set it to 50%, it's taking up half of it. So you can see how this is basically a health bar or something, and you're just worrying about the percentage size. And now we are getting into, finally, after 2 hours of the stream, now we are getting into how to interact with flex panels at runtime. So I mean interacting with flex panels, because like so far we were interacting with objects with like the mouse events, but now we can I'm going to show you how to actually change flex panels, because like I want the size of this to change based on a health value. So let's go into obj bar. Let me just run it and just make sure it's appearing correctly. Hello Snick, what's up? So the bar is appearing. I'm gonna go into the create event and just make a HP variable. I'll set it to 100. Let's set it to 50, and this will be the value controlling the bar. So now let me show you how to actually interact with flex panels at runtime. The first thing you wanna do is you wanna get the flex panel node for a layer, and through that node you can just do whatever you want. So if I make a node variable and I do layer get flex panel node, I need to enter a name for a layer. The layer that I have here is HUD2, so I'm gonna write HUD2. So what I'm doing here is I'm asking it to give me the flex panel node of this layer. And what that means is, let me see if I can open the manual for this. It is not working, but I can open the manual myself, and I'm just gonna show you what we can do with this. So these flex panel functions were actually added like last year for you to design flex panels at runtime, but these were added like as a precursor to UI layers, because UI layers are based on this. So it was these flex panel functions that were added way before UI layers. So these have already existed. And once you get the flex panel node of a UI layer, you can run any of these functions on that node and just do whatever you want. So the first thing I'm gonna do is, yeah, the link to download the beta is in the description, so you can just download this and just use the same thing that I'm using. So I have the node of the layer. Now I want the node of the HP fill panel. So that is pretty simple. I'm gonna call flex panel node get child. I'm gonna give it the parent node that I just got above, and I'm gonna ask it to get the HP fill element, the node. And because we have the node of this layer with our first function, it doesn't mean that you can just get like direct children. You can get any panel inside it. So you can't get these like elements with the get child function. If you want to get those elements, it works a bit differently, but you shouldn't have to get those like asset elements in code, because if you're modifying something, you should just work with flex panels. But we can jump from this layer node directly to this panel node where they get child call by giving it the name. And I'm going to store it in the fill node variable. And now I have the node for that, so I can change its size. And it's that simple. So let me add something to first modify the HP value. So just gonna do a simple keyboard check, get the delta value for the horizontal, and let's add that to the HP variable. And now that we can actually modify our HP variable, we can now apply that as a size, as a percentage size to the fill node. So let's call, so if you go into the flex panel node style function category, and let's specifically go into the set category, these are all the options that you see in the room editor for a flex panel, like right here. All of these options like align self and align items, justify content, direction, all of that. Once you have the ID of a node, you can just, like, you can see align content, align items, align self, direction, flex direction, and like width and position and all of that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call the set width function, and just like how you can give it a pixel value or a percentage in the editor, you can do the same here. So I'm gonna give it the fill node. I'm gonna say use the HP as the width value, and I'm gonna tell it what unit it uses. So it's gonna use the percentage unit, and I think it is called percent. It's not showing up in the autocomplete, but it should be percent. So you call this function to set the width on the node. You can see the argument list here. You have the node, then you have the width, and then you have the unit for that. And this should hopefully work. Let's check it out. And you can see it's working. And if you want, you can, if you want to just test this out and see what the value of the variable is, just so you can correlate it with the size. Why not break my voice so I can rest a bit? It's fine. I'll power through. Um, right. So I've added a draw event. So let's just do draw self so it draws itself. And let's do a, let me just set the font, and then let's do a draw text, and I'm gonna draw it at the B box right and the B box top, and I'm gonna draw the HP value. So let's try that. And you can see it's at 50, right? If I increase it when it's near 100, it's fully filling the bar. So you might be wondering, like, this is a slightly more complicated way to make a health bar if you already know how to make it in code, because in your code this would just be two function calls. Like, you would have a function call for the bar that is in the background, and you would have a function call for the bar that is in the foreground, and that's it. But we took these extra steps because now we are able to set up this bar in the editor. Like, if you just did those two function calls, it would be simpler, it would be quicker, but you would have to you would have to write in your code where the bar should be and how large it should be. Like, you would have to define those variables, and if you do it this way, then you don't have to worry about that. Like, here, literally all that the code is doing is just giving it a percentage value between 0 and 100, and you can uh, change up how large it is, or how, or like where it appears, by changing like the offset here. Like, if I set this to 100, you can see it's there. Or you can go into the main panel and set this to flex end, like make it appear in like a different corner, or make it appear in the center. So you have a lot of control here, and you can see directly in your editor uh, where it will appear. So it is a bit of like a couple of extra steps to set this up compared to just like calling two functions. But over time, if you have all of your HUD objects or like interfaces set up this way over time in your project, this just gives you more control, and you have like less numbers to deal with in your code. Exactly, like you don't have to imagine where they are. Like, that's what previously you had to do. You would write like draw sprite 10, 20, and you're like, does that work? Then you run your game and it's like, no, that's not where it is, and you close it, and then you write, do I want 20, 30? You have to like, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just see where stuff is. Will you be making a dedicated video for the RPG tutorial? For UI, I will be making a video, and it will use the RPG project. So yeah, you can consider that as a part of the RPG series, because I am doing this stream right now, but I am gonna be making a video on how to make like that pause system that we did. So I'm gonna make a basic video as like an intro to UI layers, but I want to do this stream because even though like we are 2 hours in, I'm glad, because the whole point of me doing this stream was to cover as much as I can, because there's so much and there's so many ways to like do the same thing. So I have one last thing in here. So let's get that as well. So what I want to make now is like an inventory list of like items. Let's say it's like a shop or something, and I want, if we can, on the stream right now, I want to make it scrollable. um, I'm not gonna add like a scroll bar, but I'm gonna make it scrollable with like with the scroll wheel. So let's get into that. I'm gonna make a UI layer for inventory, so call that in inventory layer. And let's add like a panel, like a basic panel. So let's use this, and I'm gonna give this panel, so call this inventory panel. So basic size of 800 by 600, and make it stretch on both. Then I'm gonna add a, let's use this, and I want to make a list of items, and that list should have uh, an icon for the item, and then like a, like the name, and then like a price. So I'm gonna make this stretch and give this a size. So for the size, let's go 100% on the width. Let's go 64. Let's go like 80 on the height. And okay, we're gonna make this have like multiple things inside the item. First thing I want to do, let's rename this to item, because it is an item in the list. Let's set a padding, so 20 pixels, and let's, because the main axis is column, let's make it laid out from the start. And let's also add a gap of 20 pixels. Now inside here, let's first add an icon. So let's say this is the icon, and I'm gonna call this icon, and then let's add some text. So I'm gonna add that, call this text, add it below the icon. Let's lay it out as a row so it looks better now. And so that text is the item description, right? I need another text item. Put this at the bottom. This is the price. So let's say it's $10. Now I want there to be a particular kind of spacing where like it goes all the way from the left to the right. So one thing you can do here, like in the item, you can set the justify content 2024.13 should be end of this month. So justify content, if you set this to space between, that basically takes care of that, but it's not looking the way I want it to, because I want the description to actually be on the left side with the icon. And let me see if I can get the text looking a bit better. So in terms of stretching, it should be the same anyway, but yeah, we can add some padding. So if I add a bit of a padding, let's say like 10 pixels or 15, that is nicer. And you can make the text stretch if the padding goes a bit too deep where it's where the text should be smaller. You can make it stretch, but I'm not gonna do that. So what I wanted here, like you can see we have icon, description, and price within the same hierarchy, and they are being laid out like this. But I want the text here to be on the same side as the icon. So to do that, the simplest solution is to actually just group them into the same flex panel. So I'll add a new flex panel. Let's say this is the info. Let's call a combination of icon and description the info. And let's set its size to automatic because I want it to be based on its contents. And because we are um, grouping the icon and description inside it, let's move them in there. And because that's now using the flex properties of that new parent, let's set that to row. And now you can see it's closer to what I want. The text is on the left side with with the icon. All I need now here is just a gap between those two. And let's just change the description. So I put them into separate, like a separate panel. And you can just like duplicate those now and add a lot of them, and they will overflow. Right. And what I want to do now is I want to make this scrollable. So let's add an object for that. Actually, I'm just going to do it in obj data because we have that already anyway. So let's the way this is going to work to make this scrollable is we want to move something, like we want to change the position, like the vertical offset of the container that has these items. But if I change the offset of this, you can see the whole box moves, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an invisible container inside this to contain the items. Then I'm going to move that invisible container. So I'm going to add a new flex panel. I'm going to call this inventory container, and I'm going to put all the items inside it. And I'm just going to change its settings so that it's that's covering 100% of its parent. Would there be an easy way to dynamically add items to it? So that's not something that I would be able to show in this stream right now, but you can do that. So if you look into the flex panel functions, there are functions for adding a new child into a node, and with that you can basically do that. Like I think you can get the copy the struct of one node and put that into a new child under a node, and then you've essentially duplicated an item at runtime. So look into those functions like adding child, and yeah, just make sure that you get the struct of a node, then you copy that struct with something like variable clone, and you add it as new child. So I'm just updating the settings of this container to match what I had before. So just gonna set it to like flex start, add a gap. And now what I can do, let me show you right here in the editor. Is there a way to extract the struct you create in the editor? Yeah, so you get the struct of it. So you call the function like flex panel node get struct, and it gives you the struct. And I think you can just like clone that like with a variable clone, and then you pass that into like a flex panel create node function, and then you insert that into another node with like flex panel insert child. So that would be the flow. So what I'm trying to show here is now that I've created this container, now if I move the offset for this, you can see it's just moving the items. It's not moving the whole panel, right? So that's what we wanted. So let's do this at runtime. So inside in layer we have in container, right? So let's try to get that. Let's do in node layer get flex panel. Can I have a global UI layer that is available in all rooms? Yeah, they are global. All of them are global. Get the node for in layer. Then the container node layer get sorry, flex panel node get child for the in node, and we get the in container. That is the name, right? Yeah. And now we can just change its top edge position or offset. So let's make a value for the scroll. Let's say scroll is 0, and let's take a wheel input. So mouse wheel down minus mouse wheel up. Then we add that or subtract that from scroll. So let's say we multiply it by 4. I think 20 should be good. I tested that before, so this word works. So now I have the scroll value, and I can just and you can see, like, with the code is just gonna go up and down depending on how I scroll the wheel. So we need to apply that to the container like I applied it in the editor, but at runtime. So let's do flex panel node style set position. Let's pass in the container. Let's say we want the top edge. Let's set the value to scroll and the unit for this to point. Right. And let's see if that works. So it is working. I'm able to scroll with the mouse wheel, and just to make this look perfect, let's go into the container and enable clip contents so it doesn't show anything beyond the container, which is not something we want to do on the container. It's something we want to do on the main panel, because we are moving the container itself. So clip contents on that wouldn't work. You go into the panel that is housing the container, and you enable clip contents on that. So now this is looking the way you would expect, like a scroll menu to look. And you can, because you're able to push it down, you can add like a limit, like if scroll is greater than 0, then you set it to 0 so that it doesn't push it down. Right, so it stops there now. It stops there. It's more logical now. So that's a basic scroll example. But that was the last example that I want to show, and I hope you'll download the beta and try it out. There's a download link in the description, and download it, play around with it. And like I said before, this is very early. Like, the first version of this came out like a week ago, and it is still subject to change, and that will be based on your feedback, because so far just we've been using it internally, but now it's in your hands, and the way you use GameMaker will be different from the way we use GameMaker, because everyone uses the same tool in a different way. And so your perspective and what you would expect from this, like, I'm not just talking about using it and submitting bug reports, but also just like your feedback. And once you do download it, go into the help menu and click on report a GameMaker bug, and here you can, like, just submit whether you want to submit like a feature request or a bug report. This makes it really easy, and if you are submitting a bug report, then please do attach the project, because for bug reports that is usually needed. But yeah, check it out, do use it. uh, During the beta it will be a bit, there will be bugs, but uh, especially like having your feedback is important during this cycle. And like I mentioned before, this is the built-in system that we have now for layouts, but we will be rolling out prefab assets with like a pre-made button object for you, a pre-made menu, like a pre-made slider or like checkbox, all of those elements. We are slowly going to roll them out, starting with a button, so that once you have those prefab assets, you don't even have to worry about like how we place text inside these panels and like all the stuff that we did to make a button. Once you have those prefab assets out, uh, you'll just like drop that in and it'll be much easier as well. So we will have that coming, but yeah, while this is here, download the beta, go use it. If you have any questions, I'm gonna be here for a couple more minutes, so if you have any questions you can write in the chat now and I'll take a look. Top flex for clipping and its child for moving. Yeah, yeah, basically that way. And you can see how like when I was starting to trying to come up with a solution to make a scrollable menu, that didn't occur to me, and I had to look at like someone else's project, like the way they had done it. So they are like little things like that where it won't immediately like make sense, but then you have to come up with like something to make it work. um, when you do download the beta, there is another link in the description. There's a GitHub link and that has projects, like sample projects, so you can just download those and take a look and like how they're set up. Nine slicing was enabled for the buttons. It was, yeah. So all the sprites that I'm using here, like this, you go here, right, and it's resizing. Uh, it has nine slicing enabled. So if you disable nine slicing, it looks like this. So yeah, use this with nine slice. It's is a perfect recipe for UI. And just to recap it, what this helps you with is laying out your interface, and it draws it on the GUI layer by itself. So you don't have to worry about um, calling the draw GUI event, like coding the draw GUI event yourself and worrying about the positions. It helps you with the layout in the editor, and in the end what it does, it gives you flex panels, and you can put an object inside a flex panel, and then with that object you can do whatever you want. So you can program like basic interaction to like animations or like whatever you want. And I showed you how you can get a flex panel node at runtime, and once you have the node and you have the child node that you want, you can call any of the style set functions on it and you can do whatever you want, like you can animate it or do whatever. So if there aren't any questions, then I'll wrap it up. We're gonna keep the stream up, so if you missed any part of it or if you joined late, you can watch it later. And yeah, it's like 2.5 hours now, so that really is the longest stream I've ever done. So yeah, I really had a lot of fun and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And did I miss a question? Is there a way to have padding on the clip content? In your example right now, the buttons are overlapping the border of the container. I think the solution to that is just to add another container there. Um, and that container would have the margin to cover up that border pixels. And so you apply clip contents to that container. So imagine like a container that is a bit smaller, and that is a container that has clip contents applied to it. Will you ever work on an inventory system? Because I am planning an inventory part for the RPG series, That was the most requested thing for the RPG series. So expect that in a couple months. I should have that uh, in a couple of months. Yeah, I am planning that though. This was truly a game maker. It was truly a game maker, and we were all game maker. I I'm gonna end that now. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the 49 people who are still here, and it's like 12:30 a.m. now, so I'm gonna go and try to sleep. Even though I've just had coffee. Yay, sleep. But yep, and if you guys enjoy streams and you would like us to do more streams, let us know in the comments. It's always good to know what you guys like, and so we can deliver that. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna end the stream now. Kinda don't want to. This was really fun, but I'm gonna have to end it now. So, thank you so much.